Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion on how cloud native is changing the role of the CISO. We're delighted today to have two senior security leaders in the industry with us to share their thoughts on several different topics around this concept of the cloud native journey, and really the broad interpretation of that as digital transformation and all of the aspects of migrating to the cloud. From infrastructure all the way to modern application development. So first, at the top there, you see Yaron Levy, CISO at Dolby Labs, longtime CISO before Dolby, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Kansas City, oftentimes speaker on the circuit, is active in the Cloud Security Alliance and the like. So we're delighted to have Yaron. Yaron, welcome and thank you.
Thank you.
And we're also really fortunate to have Bill Shin, Senior Principal Office of the CISO at Amazon. So senior leader at Amazon and in the community broadly, and has a deep background in security stretching back into JP Morgan and US Bank, as well as all the things that he's done in his more than decade at Amazon. So Bill, we're thrilled to have you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, let's jump right in. So we'll start out just talking about digital transformation and cloud migration and app development broadly. I think this is a topic that most in the audience and the community, hear about a lot, and they obviously get informed and stay current on many aspects of it. But I thought, just given the breadth of experience that both of you bring to this, that you might be able to share some aspects of this topic that maybe are less well understood relative to what most people would identify with the topic. So maybe Yaron, if I could just start with you, what strikes you about this journey as you've gone through it and seen others go through it that maybe is not as well understood in the community?
Yep. No, absolutely. So, I started to deal with the cloud probably back in, 2009 timeframe. I still remember the first time I went to AWS, to do the initial kind of cloud training and understanding what cloud is. And since then, probably for the last 10, 11, 12 years, what still strikes me is that how many people and how many organizations still don't understand the shared responsibility model of cloud. Who is responsible for what? And many organizations unfortunately think that, okay, I'm moving to the cloud, I'm good, I don't have to worry about anything anymore. The cloud service provider will take care of that. Well, if you read, the terms and conditions from the cloud service providers, you may not be covered as much as you think you are. Then there's the other aspect of, if we think about the cloud model itself, infrastructure, platform, and software, what does that look like, right? So even if I have an infrastructure as a service, I've seen people who are thinking about well, I don't have to worry about it. AWS or for any cloud or any of the other cloud providers for that matter, they will take care of it for me. No, they're not. Right? They take care of the platform itself, but you have the responsibility from the infrastructure up, and so on. So this is something that is still largely what I'm finding largely misunderstood. There's another side to it. When it comes to compliance, I'm still amazed to see how many third parties will send me the attestations of the cloud service provider as their own attestation that they are compliant. And this is something that, again, you kind of look at that and do you really understand what you are asking, what you're doing, what you are testing for? It may sound funny. I've seen that so many times, and it's pretty common, especially in some industries. So that's another aspect. The other aspect I want to mention is also what does it mean? That also kind of related to that, but what does it mean when you're moving to the cloud? Yeah, we talk about cloud native and companies who were born in the cloud or developing on the cloud. But then there's also many others who think, again, I'm going to move to the cloud. I'm just going to move, lift and shift whatever I have, and then I'm done. I don't have to worry about it again anymore, right? Again, that's another misconception because it doesn't change or it doesn't give you any protections from that perspective. But it also, in some cases, you actually may be moving from what I call a quiet neighborhood to a more noisy one, because all of a sudden now that you have a lot of neighbors that you may not be the target, but they will be the target, and therefore you may be impacted by a stray bullet or something like that. So there are many aspects that people have to think about and be aware to make this transition. But again, I think that still many organizations, many people still grossly misunderstand.
Yeah, those are great points, all three. The shared responsibility, piece of it, and the compliance and what's required to be compliant, and then don't think that you're good if you're just lifting and shifting. There's actually a whole host of problems there too. All three of those are great points. Bill, how about from your perspective?
I think one, to kind of pivot a little bit into a different aspect of when it comes to security and the security persona, and practitioner, don't look away from the benefits of this digital transformation and cloud migration for security use cases. Most of the customers I talk to, they really struggle with the same scalability challenges in the security customers, right? The security teams are struggling with the same scalability challenges their business is struggling with. They're struggling to take advantage of new innovation more quickly, to be agile in their own development, to build internal microservices for security use cases, things like authentication, authorization, logging and monitoring, all the core controls they're automating. They want to automate as much as they can. And cloud in particular, and API-driven architectures that are modern really can modernize the security use cases too. And I think that's something that's maybe a little less understood, or people are looking at the risks of moving to a new deployment model and taking on a new set of technologies. But don't discount the upside benefits of elastic scale, infinite logging, analytics services, things. And there's tons of folks that are using cloud-based security services with a lot of success, as opposed to running their own infrastructure on premises to perform those same functions. It's different. It's a different acquisition cycle as well. So the paying as you go model of cloud applies equally to security use cases as it does for digital transformation or business or other kinds of workloads, right? Versus buying fixed infrastructure that depreciates over time and you're kind of stuck with until you can upgrade it again. So there's a lot of advantages to, I think, having that more dynamic environment that are applicable to the CISO.
And that's a great transition, I think, into our next discussion point, which is, thinking about how to take advantage of some of these transitions. At the technology layer, you start going down the path of recognizing all the differences in the tech stack of a cloud forward model and a digitally transformed business. If you abstract out of all the individual transitions, the one thing that strikes you is just a lot of complexity. There's just many transitions in individual systems and tools and platforms. There's transitions in technology that cut across the tech stack and the products. What advice would both of you have for CISOs trying to think about how do I get control and manage this rapid increase in complexity as we go through these transitions? And maybe Bill, I could just start with you on this one, bridging off your last comment.
The cloud allows for more experimentation, right? You can change your architecture more quickly and make decisions more quickly. The upfront investment in selecting a technology is less risk. Typically, when you bought a capital investment of a technology, you had a long proof of concept period because that investment was a long-term investment. And if you got it wrong, you're kind of stuck with it. Well, the cost of failure is lower with experimenting with new technologies. So while it may appear complex, it's much quicker to get to the technologies that you want to select with that faster iteration and experimentation. But again, I think education is important. And we talk a lot with customers about identity and access management. This is one example. We have nearly 200 services that require authorization, and we have one language to describe it, but it's a diverse set of IT services. So it's a new language. And so it just like any authorization framework, you have to invest in people and time to understand it. So it's probably not groundbreaking innovation or insight there, but I think it's education is a huge part of it. You got to get people trained up on this stuff and make sure they're not taking on technologies they can't support.
It's great. It's great advice. Just again, kind of your point on from the previous, just leveraging some of these transitions to think differently. In this case, rapid experimentation, to do proof of concepts, more quickly, and that just gives you a way to be more agile to manage some of the downside of a bad decision. That's a great point. Yaron, how about you?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we always have to think about is how do we adapt and how do we change even our approach, right? So if traditionally, especially from a security perspective, we used to look at the perimeter, and we used to look at, okay, we have for the most part one perimeter that we are protecting and defending. And I hear a lot of people saying, well, the perimeter is gone, there's no perimeter anymore, and so on. Well, the reality is that I would argue that the perimeter is actually multiplying. We have now a lot of perimeters, and Dave, you mentioned complexity, so we have a lot of complex perimeters. And in a way, I mean, the perimeter is shrinking, and it's actually moving very, very fast. So I no longer have like, this one big data center that I put my arms around it, my firewalls around it, and I call it good. I'm using tons of different services in the cloud, infrastructure, platform, service, software, and so on. So I have a lot of more perimeters to defend and protect. And the question is like, how do you do that in scale? How do you kind of handle all that complexity? If I go back, to the same perimeter mindset or concept, from earlier, for the most part, there was like one team, small or large, that was tasked with defending the perimeter, defending the systems. I mean, keeping the systems up and running, and so on. Now that model no longer scales. Now that I have a lot of more complexity and I have many more perimeters. So the question is like, how do we shift and how do we adjust from kind of very centralized model to more decentralized model, and actually start pushing a lot of these responsibilities closer to where the work is actually done. So like, one monolithic, one team that covers everything doesn't scale anymore. The flip side of that, decentralizing everything, you may end up with a lot of chaos and inconsistencies and other problems and a lot of cracks that people can slip through. So really kind of finding, that balance, between centralized and some decentralized based on what you need to do. And then lastly, when you look at it, Bill, you mentioned, some of the core capabilities of the cloud. How do you leverage, things like, data that you get from your tools, from the cloud infrastructure itself, from the cloud platform themselves. And how do you use that, to drive decisions and automate a lot of your operations and automations? That's pretty much like the only way that you could scale and help support all of that complexity.
As you're starting to talk about decentralizing, that brings up, the collaboration model, and so we pivot to the next discussion point on how that's changing. As you decentralize security, but then as you have many more stakeholders, and so I wonder, Yaron, again, maybe keeping the baton, if you could kick us off on this one and talk about how the CISO needs to adjust the model, just given the changes in stakeholders.
We're looking at, for example, like low code, no code solutions. The marketing department, HR department, finance department. Now you have people who are not necessarily engineers by definition, but they have the power and they have, tools, that they can create their own solutions. So when we start thinking about all those aspects, and we start thinking about aspects of security around risk management, threat modeling, defense, how do we deal with vulnerabilities, how we think about, how do you approach it kind of more like from the bad guys perspective, so we can find all those holes and gaps. These skills now need to expand way beyond just security or just IT. It needs to expand, or engineering. It needs to expand now into other departments that traditionally we didn't classify as, let's call it, technical departments, right? So I think a lot of what the CISO role is shifting towards is a lot of evangelism, a lot of education, a lot of getting buying from these different groups and making sure they understand why they should care, why it's important, how what they do contribute to the overall risk of the organization, and what are the things that they need to do in order to contribute to the overall security. So, it's kind of like, I like the Spider-Man, the line from Spider-Man, that with great power comes great responsibility.
Turn it to Bill, and maybe as I do, you guys can think about the background. It occurred to me as you were talking, I wonder if CISOs are getting the right preparation and training for those aspects of their job, which are sort of recently emerged, like evangelism, education, as they go through the career path and the preparation to be a CISO, or do you sort of arrive at that and then you discover that you're missing a number of skills? But before we get to that, Bill, what thoughts do you have to share on this stakeholder and collab question?
I think Yaron's points are strong, that it does need to be important and taken seriously by bigger parts of an enterprise. The CISOs have always been saying security is important. I think I've seen successful CISOs partner with their business peers and to make it a top priority of the organization, not just for the security organization. It's one thing for the CISO to say it's important, to follow the right processes and safeguard data, but to say this is the top priority for our entire organization is protecting and safeguarding the data that people trust us with or that we generate, whether that's healthcare data or intellectual property or pre-release video content, whatever your content is, banking data. If that's the top priority in your organization, everyone understands that it's important. They may not have the skill sets to safeguard it properly, and that's where the CISO comes in to offer low friction, low bar of entry services, whether that's consulting services or technical services, to make it simple and easy for the people that can now, like to Aaron's point, with a credit card or with BI skills, move data around in new ways that, if improperly, represent risk to an enterprise or organization. So I think it has to be everyone's top priority. It has to come from the CEO and from the leaders in the organization, that it is a core part of your values. And if that's understood, then it becomes much easier for the CISO to say, I'm here to help, right? Versus finding out about something later or someone not being aware that security was important at all. There is a point where people need to take deeper ownership too, and that's more the federated model, particularly in engineering-oriented companies. Like we have, like I said, 200 plus service teams. They own security for those services. Like our security organization provides a bunch of shared services. We perform security operations. We have a oversight function, but our service teams own the security of their service. This is kind of the full stack engineering, end-to-end kind of engineering model that I think works, and works outside of just tech companies. To see, you're a product owner, you own it. Security, if you think security owns it, then that's a problem. Like, you own it. We're going to help you fix it, and we're going to tell you when it needs to be fixed or if it's incorrect or whatever, but you own it. And that business owner of that application has to own it. And eventually they start funding security resources, right? Otherwise you keep telling them that they have issues. So I think it's about ownership, culture of ownership, culture top priority. And I think that's a big part of it. And then the big collaboration I think I see changing is collaboration between security organizations and engineering organizations. And we'll talk more about that too.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And just maybe real quick, because we're probably paced through a little bit quicker the last three questions, but what advice would you have people in the audience who are trying to develop their own careers down the CISO path? Yeah. And they maybe don't have the experience of running these big cross-functional initiatives across all these different groups that are similar to the orchestration model that both of you are describing here. What advice would you have for people trying to develop their career to build those skills so that when they actually become a CISO, they're able to execute well here?
I'll say one thing and hand it over to someone who's in that role now, who's worked their way up through that. I'd say getting out of the security organization temporarily. I mean, not permanently, but having better visibility into the other parts of your enterprise. Like in banking, I was in a security organization, but I got to spend a lot of time with the business people in commercial banking or in card and card acquisition and that kind of. I understood their business process, and the business information security officer role might fulfill that a little bit as kind of a career path, to spend time in the business units, so you see their perspective of what their P&L is, what their top line goals are, what their culture is, and then have that perspective when you move back to run a security organization. Because otherwise, I think you're operating in kind of a vacuum.
That makes sense. Yaron, you've been a CISO for so long, it may be hard to remember back before you were, but what advice still would you have? Because I know you've grown leaders in your organizations, into that CISO role. So what advice would you have?
Yeah, I think, traditionally, when we look at like a development of a security practitioner, I mean, oftentimes we look at it predominantly from a technical lens, and you look at like different certifications and different trainings, right? I mean, CISSP, etc. I mean, people build a lot of those skills and gain a lot of those skills, and also kind of measure themselves based on, okay, I got this certification, that certification, and so on. I think one of the things that we need to pay more attention to, especially if you want to be on a track for kind of more of a leadership position, is what we call those kind of, something's going to call them the soft skills. Excellent communication, know how to communicate, who to communicate, what do you say, who do you say it, when do you say it? I mean, sounds easier than it actually is, but it's not, right? Also kind of develop that, skill for building relationship within the organization. That will help you tremendously when you need to, first of all, understand where they're coming from, what the business is trying to accomplish, how we at the end of the day are there to enable them to accomplish that, not to stop them and tell them no, but how do we enable them to accomplish what they need to accomplish securely? In order to do that, you need to have a lot of empathy to where they're coming from. You also need to be able to communicate clearly, but you also, in order to do that, I mean, you need to build trust. And to build that trust and have them kind of trusting you and kind of inviting you to the table and being, with you or having you as part of kind of the team, That's only done through relationship building.
So just with an eye on the clock, the next topic is a pretty broad one in terms of a technology transition that's associated with developing apps natively in the cloud with digital transformation is obviously the trend towards building security and upstream, from the beginning as code is written. It's a broad topic, but just given the time, maybe if there's just one bigger picture observation that you could make about those broad topics.
Yeah, I think it's a really opportune time for security to understand how software is built and delivered. I think a lot of security professionals came up through risk management, compliance, network administration, systems administration, and they're not necessarily, there's a small percentage of the security industry that are professional software developers. And I think the speed at which software is being developed and the speed of data growth is why software is being developed at such a rapid growth to be able to consume and make meaning and benefit out of that data. That's driving a huge push in the rate of software development. And it's where all the action is security-wise. So getting into how code gets from a developer's head to production and how it processes data, understanding that process is the most important thing. The tool chains they use, the kind of check-in practices, the pull requests, like all the new modern continuous integration, continuous deployment patterns that software engineers are using, huge opportunity for security to understand where to sit and where to inject themselves. And then I think the second piece is looking for, commonalities and automation opportunities. So, developers can have a lot of autonomy. They can move really fast and they can build and run in small iterative teams, but there's certain things, crypto, identity, logging, network perimeters, different protocol implementation. There's things that are kind of primitive, and then having good guardrails around that stuff. So that, let's say you spin up a development environment, it's going to be reasonably secure, especially in the cloud. It's quite simple to do these days to build a developer environment, all the way from dev to production. It's got good, strong guardrails around it, around kind of the primitives of what you can and can't do. And then lowering the friction from there, right? Like automate things like static analysis and dynamic analysis, automate linting for security. There's a whole bunch of things you can put in the dev pipelines that are real opportunities to partner and accelerate the rate of development.
I like that advice. If you're a security practitioner, understand DevOps before you wade in with DevSecOps. That's a great point. Just for time, I know there's a lot of great content we have here, but with a couple of minutes left, just touch, if both of you could, quickly on building and retaining teams in light of all these transitions. Just maybe quick couple of bullets from both of you, so we can get to the final question here. But Bill, maybe you first, and then to your own.
Sure. The whole industry is stressed with this, right? Security practitioners are hard to recruit and maintain. So I think you have to find talent in new places, having a really diverse view of the workforce and finding people that might be non-traditional security people, not necessarily looking for certifications or college degrees. There's people that look at veterans, look at diverse and underrepresented, workforce folks. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow security talent there. The other thing is retention. You can't saddle security analysts with repetitive tasks. They're too high of demand, right? So the security people are curious. They want to automate things. So finding ways to reduce the routine, mundane work and automate your way out of that stuff, I think, is what you need to do to encourage retention and find the curious, high talent security practitioners.
Great points, both. Your own, quickly on your side.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. You definitely want to enlist everybody into the neighborhood watch, right? So as we said before, it's not just IT, it's not just security, it's not just engineering. We have a lot of other people, a lot of other, constituents, from the organization that are now developing, and need to be involved or are involved in various aspects of, cloud security, and so on. So building that into the culture, understanding the differences where people are coming from. As security practitioners, we're usually wired to break stuff. Developers are wired to build stuff. That's a very big difference between the two, right? So having that empathy for each side and understanding where they're coming from. I love, Dave, what you said about understand DevOps first before you kind of inject the sec into it. Yes, but it's ultimately everybody, have to kind of play within that.
You've both given great advice to the practitioners along the way, but maybe just the last point, advice for the partners in the audience. So this would span everything from integrators to vendors to service providers and all across the spectrum. But for people who build and deploy technology and help clients, what advice would you give to them as they try to navigate these transitions, just as the customers with CISOs do?
I can start. I think one of the things is that it's a journey. It's not something that you just switch and it happens. It's a journey, and I love the fact you said partners, because we need these partners. I mean, to partner with us on that journey. I mean, as we kind of work through that. How do you find the right balance? How do you leverage the good things from all the partners and have the partners kind of work together and play nicely with each other, as opposed to start just kind of pointing fingers and just blaming each other for different things.
That's great. Bill, last word is yours.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Yaron's comments, and thanks for hosting us today. I'd say, yeah, be honest and upfront about the investment it's going to take, right? Just like any technology transition, it's not overnight. And as partners, we try to do this. I think I would echo to other partners and practitioners, just to be really honest and upfront that the technology alone is not going to solve a problem. It never really has. You have to have people in the culture to adopt that technology and to actually do something with it of value. And so, as you're working with a enterprise as a partner, or like a systems integrator or something like that, or an ISV, be upfront about whether this customer is going to have success with your service or your product, given the constraints that they're under. And I think just be honest about that. Your culture, needs to change this way, or you need to adopt these practices in order, as people, to be able to really leverage this technology, because some of these technologies are quite sophisticated, and they take a transition, and investment, and training, and they take honesty about what it's really going to take to get it done. I think that's what people want. So.
Yep. That's great advice.
If I just may add like one more thing. I mean, I think we talk a lot about like building architectures and solutions, and in our journey and different things that we're doing. We also need to be careful not to fall too much in love in our architecture as it is, and kind of hold to like legacy things that we have, because it decays over time, and things have to change, and things are changing even quickly now with cloud. So really, how do we kind of more embrace that cloud mentality? Bill talked a lot about experimentation and more moving fast. We need to think about that as well. I mean, as we kind of build our programs, and how do we adjust? I mean, to be able to shift, to move even faster, even though it's difficult for us to do that in many cases.
That's a great point to close on. I just want to thank both of you for a rich and broad discussion. I think that covered a lot of ground, and hopefully gave some great advice and insight to our audience, both on the practitioner side and the partner side. Thank you both for being leaders in the community, and for standing up and leaning in with Sumo as we try to chart the path towards modern security. So we really appreciate it. This brings our panel to its conclusion. I want to thank our panelists again, and again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone in our global audience. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.